So how many of you made New Year's resolutions? How many of you have broken your New Year's resolution in 3 days? It's great to be Jewish because the Machzor High Holiday Prayer Book that we use during the other New Year, Rosh Hashanah, does all the resolution making for us. We don't have to do a thing. We don't have to make any resolutions. If you want to change the way that you talk about people and do a better job of not engaging in lashon hara or gossip, Machzor does it for you. If you want to treat the elderly with more respect, the Machzor does it for you. If you want to have safer thoughts, no naughty thoughts, the Machzor does it for you. The Machzor does all of it for you, but unfortunately, for the January 1st version of Rosh Hashanah, we have to do that for ourselves, and we often joke, and there are articles written, every op-ed of every newspaper, for those of us who still read newspapers, has articles on resolutions and how long it takes for people to break them and the psychology of resolutions and why we engage in things in Judaism often when we study Kol Nidre. Why do we make vows or resolutions that we know that we're going to break and then create sort of a legal way of getting out of it at Kol Nidre every year? All of these questions surround us during the new year. And one of the dangers of taking off some time during this time of year is that you really start to think about yourself, your job, your life, your family. And I know a lot of us have taken some time off of work, and unfortunately, if you work for the federal government, you're being forced to take time off of work. So a lot of people are having a lot of time to think about a lot of things. So Jamie and I went on a hike in Sedona last week. I was in Flagstaff with Ethan during New Year's, during the snow, very pretty, and right before that in Sedona. And we did a vortex hike. I still don't really understand what a vortex is or what it means. And having now gone to a vortex, I definitely, I felt nothing. Now that could be because I'm a person who feels nothing, and that's possible, but I think that's not it. It's supposed to be, I guess, contemplative, and it's supposed to have energy. It's one of these places where in Sedona is filled with vortexes, where there is some sort of very cool, transcendent force, energy, I don't know what it is, where trees and roots and twisted, anyway, I felt nothing at the vortex. It could have been because it was sort of tourist season and there were people talking. You shouldn't talk at a vortex. It should be a quiet place, a contemplative place, but it's a good place to think about stuff. Now, I didn't, again, feel anything. And maybe someone can, and I'm sure, given who you are, people will, after services, try to explain to me why vortexes, or is it vortexi, are important and legitimate. And I'm sure they are, and for those of you who enjoy the Sedona vortexes, yesher koach, way to go. But if I was thinking during the vortex walk and throughout the time off about a resolution that I wanted to take into consideration and wanted to share with you. But I'm not going to do that yet. I want to talk a little bit about Moses's experience at the burning bush last week. If you remember in last week's Parsha, he has this great experience. I guess you could call it a vortex of fire, where God tells him to go and speak to the Israelites, and Moses says many times, I don't want to, I don't want to, I don't want to. This week's Parsha is so, and Jason and I were just talking about it, there are so many famous lines that we aren't aware of until we read it. For example, the idea of the 4 cups of wine comes from this week's Parsha. The rationale for the 4 cups of wine comes from this week's Parsha. The idea, the concept of God hardening the Pharaoh's heart comes from this week's Parsha. There are the first set of plagues in this week's Parsha. The Parsha Vayera, in fact, in its outset, at its outset, begins with a line where God appears almost as if to say God again appears and speaks to Moses in trying to, again, convince Moses to go back to the Pharaoh, to confront his own fears about confronting the Pharaoh and his own insecurities, and says to Moses, I am God, the one who appeared to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob. I mentioned this in the YouTube thing this week that Rabbi Mason Barkin and I did. We were talking about being known by the name of your ancestors, the merit of our ancestors. It's as if Moses, at the last minute here, God has to say, look, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You're part of that story. You have to go speak and confront the Pharaoh. And he says to him, I appeared to them as El Shaddai, and I am appearing to you as Yud-He Vav-He, which is the unpronounceable name of God, the Tetragrammaton, as it is called in the academic circles. And God talks about the covenant that God made with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and basically says to Moses, look, enough of your excuses and your rationale for not wanting to confront the Pharaoh. It's going to be hard work. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be delicate. Plus, I'm about to start hardening the Pharaoh's heart. It's going to be nearly impossible to change the Pharaoh's mind, but I am in covenant with your ancestors, with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. We are therefore in covenant. We are in a relationship, and that relationship is not all sugar and spice and all things nice. There are times when it will involve doing the right thing for the right reason, and the person or people with whom you have to deal with aren't going to necessarily be feeling that they should be doing the right thing for the right reason, or if they do and it's in conflict with you, there will be even more conflict. But I am with you. I was with them, and I am with you. Now, Moses is still incredibly insecure about this confrontation. So the first confrontation happens in this week's Parsha, right at the beginning. So he gets this final pep talk from God. God says, say, therefore, to the Israelites, that I am that God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, and that I will free you from slavery, and the Egyptians will deliver you, and we will live happily ever after at Mount Sinai, where we will, as a people, engage in this covenant in the Torah. I've got your back. I had their back. You get the picture. So the first confrontation that Moses has is with who? The Israelites or the Egyptians? The Israelites. If you watched the YouTube clip, you heard this. Moses says what God just said. I am coming on behalf of the God of Abraham and Isaac and of Jacob. I am here to bring you to the land flowing with milk and honey, to the land of Israel, to redeem you from Egyptian bondage. Moses says this, and the people did not listen, couldn't listen to Moses. It says that they were kotzer ruach. That, according to the commentary and the translation, that their spirits were so crushed from hundreds of years of bondage that they couldn't hear a word. Think they are in the darkest of dark places. They are slaves. They have been dehumanized to the point where they can't even hear what it is that Moses is saying. To put it into a more modern, contemporary context, think about all of the survivors of Auschwitz and what they may have thought or said when the American or the Russian or the British army came to redeem them and release them, and then think about what they must have said or thought when the Zionists came along and said, come with us to this state that we are creating called Israel. They must have felt the same way. Kotzer ruach, crushed, completely crushed, unable to see hope and the promise of the future. So Moses, who's already insecure, goes back to God and says, what is it that you expect? If the Israelites, here's the direct quote, the Israelites wouldn't listen to me, my word, how in God's name, well, in your name, then, thank you, should I go to the Pharaoh? How's the Pharaoh going to listen to me, a man of impeded speech, a man who has a stutter. And what does God say? It's very sarcastic almost. Fine, take Aaron. When you go to the Pharaoh, take Aaron with you. And then the Torah goes into this long list of genealogies before the confrontation, the first confrontation with Pharaoh, where the Pharaoh's heart is hardened. So Moses goes to the Israelites and says, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, covenant, all good things, hope, future, everything is going to be great. You're coming with me. The people don't listen because kotzer ruach, their spirits have been crushed by slavery and oppression, and their worlds have been darkened. There's no way of them thinking that there will be a hopeful outcome. Moses goes back to God and says, if they won't listen to me, there's no way Pharaoh's going to listen to me, and I have a stutter. And God sort of says, fine. Like, I've had it, Moses, fine, enough. Take Aaron with you. Aaron will be the spokesman. Are you with me so far? That's literally about 5 verses of Torah. Now, the commentaries come in. One of the Hasidic commentaries that we use at Torah study, the Sfas Emes, the Rabbi Yehuda Leib Alter of Ger, and uses the expression that Moses says, which is, I'm a man of impeded speech, and translates it as Moses saying, I have uncircumcised lips. That Moses says, I don't have Jewish lips. I don't have kosher lips. In other words, I'm not pure. I'm not pure enough to do this. And the Midrash comes in, this commentary, this beautiful Hasidic commentaries, and says, yes, this is a metaphor for all Jews, for every excuse that we ever give for why it is that we won't speak up. We're not smart enough. We don't know enough. Right? People say this all the time. Rabbi, I feel very Jewish, but I don't know enough. Or I have expertise in this part of my life, but no expertise at all in Jewish ideas or theology or philosophy or history or concepts or Torah. Right? It's the excuse that we all give to ourselves and to others, which is we don't have circumcised lips. We aren't pure enough to say the things that we know we should say, and the confrontations that we know that we should have, because, like Moses, we have that insecurity. There is a rabbi named Rabbi Ishmael in Jewish tradition who taught that the basis for the entire Torah is our opposition to idolatry. That is the basis, foundation of all of Torah. The opposition to idolatry, meaning that we as Jews don't give in to false gods, false narratives, false stories, lies. We don't give in to that. The Torah is there to teach us and to give us, if you will, the backbone to confront those aspects of the world around us. Idolatry is taken and expanded to a sense that makes it applicable to us even today. Anything that keeps us from hearing God's voice, or our over-involvement in the vanity that occupies most of the attention in this world and keeps us from being empty enough to receive the word of God, all of that is idolatry. Idolatry, therefore, is outside of us, outside influences, in a political conversation or in a dispute with someone over an idea. We often quote or use others' words as truth, as fact, as real, to make our arguments, to frame our arguments. I'm sure all of us feel this way, that when we're in a conversation with someone about immigration, or we're in a conversation with someone or argument with someone about any kind of political policy, or the state of Israel, or raising children, right? Or taking care of the elderly, or our parents for some of us, right? That they're using sound bites and ideas and words from someone they heard on AM radio, or some magazine that they read, or some op-ed piece, right? They're not using their own words, their own ideas, their own thoughts, and according to this midrash, they're not using the concepts of Torah, of what we call the truth. That is to say, what is real, the teaching of God. The commentary continues that since Torah has already been given to us, the voice of God should be readily available to us. Like, we shouldn't be saying, like the Israelites did, that we are kotzer ruach, that our spirits are crushed, or that we have any excuse. We're the luckiest Jews to live in the history of the world, right? We have no kotzer ruach or victim complex anymore that we, right now, thank God, that we should be using as our crutch. We need to listen to that voice within. The commentary continues that the power to hear the voice of God is something that requires concentration. It's something that requires us to empty all of those voices that we hear constantly or read constantly, to completely empty those in order to make room for Torah, for what it is that is authentically Jewish teaching. Sound and silence come together in that profoundly contemplative idea of purging, of emptying everything that we thought that we knew, and resolving to renew our souls, our spirits, the voice within, with words of Torah. This idea calls for a faith in ourselves and in the power of prayer and of learning and of teaching and of listening to transform our lives. So here's my resolution, my New Year's resolution. I'm going to take a shot at it. I think it's time that one of the things I think I pride myself on over the last 15, 16 years with you is that we don't do politics from the Bima. We try not to. And when we do, we try to do it within the context of Torah. If it has to do with Israel or a certain policy. I don't want to start doing politics from the Bima. But I want to start, I think we've been together long enough, and I'm scared to death to do this, by the way. I feel very much like Moses. I'm nothing like Moses, by the way. But in the tradition of Moses, I think it's time to start talking about what Judaism says about the many issues that we as a society are confronting. For example, Judaism has a profound voice, if you will. Torah has a profound voice on the idea of welcoming the stranger. Welcoming the stranger, meaning an immigrant, someone who is here even illegally, a resident alien. There are many categories that, very terse, there's a lot of information, so I'm just giving you a brief overview. A lot of information about it as godly, as an act that is a mitzvah. You are required to welcome the stranger. Judaism also, for those of you who liked what I just said, Judaism also has very important, strong mitzvot regarding, not just mitzvot, but values regarding fortification of cities, of literally building walls to protect yourself. What I want to do, what my New Year's resolution is to confront both sides of that argument, to give us a better understanding, and therefore, I hope, a healthier conversation with our friends and neighbors about what Judaism really teaches us. I don't like it when people say what Judaism says. Judaism doesn't say anything. It's what God says. It's what our tradition teaches us about how important it is to be welcoming and loving of immigrants. And at the same time, how important it is, how important a value it is, a mitzvah it is, to fortify your city. Even the rabbi said that you should build a fence around the Torah. And both exist and are paradoxical, and both exist and are true, and both exist and should be discussed so that we can at least understand what our tradition teaches us about immigration, about human beings, about lying, what our tradition teaches us about megalomaniacs, what our tradition teaches us. That's what the whole thing about the hardening of the heart is about, right? I think it's time that I hope you trust me enough to do it delicately, but also straightforwardly, to have classes and from the Bima to talk about the ideas and the topics of our day from a Jewish perspective, from a Torah perspective. These fights that we have among each other, that we see played out in television and the media, these are fights that all exist in Torah, and the rabbis fought tooth and nail over these ideas too. And I think that's going to help us frame our arguments and have our fights from a place of covet, of respect, if we do it within a Jewish framework, within the framework of Torah. We're Jews. We fight. We argue. 3 Jews, 4 opinions. You know the joke. But I do believe this midrash very much, going back to Moses, that we let so much get in our way of talking about what we feel inside that is true, that is real, that it gets hidden almost, and that when we were confronted with reality, we start to make stuff up to match our argument. And that stuff often has no bearing, no foundation, no anchoring in Judaism. We're Jews. We have a responsibility. We're going to learn in 2 weeks about redemption. What does redemption and freedom mean? It means you have responsibilities to learn, to know, and to teach. So my New Year's resolution is to be less afraid of you and more trusting of you. To be less afraid to say what's in my heart and my kishkas. Obviously, I didn't need a vortex for this. But also to say with utter humility that, like Moses, I'm not here to convince anyone of anything, but I want you to listen to each other, and I want you to listen to us. And we'll put classes together, and we will try to take this idea out for a spin of taking the ideas, the concepts that have sometimes diametrically opposed viewpoints from within Jewish tradition. We've been doing this for thousands of years. We should begin doing it again here at CBI. Talking about these issues from within Torah and trusting each other enough to know that we're doing it because we're B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, and because we believe in this covenant. That because we have a God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, we are bound to the covenantal value of doing things from within this structure and of seeing the world through Jewish eyes. So I want us all to have, this isn't going to be fun, but it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be tough. And we're going to have some great conversations this year. But I want us to start doing it because we have something to say. The Torah has something to say. I think I've been a little afraid to say it. On this Shabbat, then, I hope you keep your New Year's resolutions. I hope you make every effort to listen to each other, to respectfully speak to each other, to resolve to be better Jews and better Americans by being more kind and patient and loving and less rigid with each other, and to not use the excuse of not knowing enough to be able to make an argument that you know in your heart, your Jewish heart, to be true and real. Then, I hope as a community we will find more honor and more integrity and more commitment to our service to God and Torah and Israel through learning. Shabbat Shalom.